Hello, I'm Christian Roman, and I'm a story artist at Pixar, and let me tell you my story. Once upon a time, long ago, in a magical time called the 1980s. That's me around 15 years old, living in Massachusetts. All through high school, I loved to draw fantasy and sci-fi pictures. I loved two-point perspective, and I would write stories that went along with all of my drawings. And because of that, I decided to go to college for art as a painting major at Boston University. I thought that by learning to be a better artist would help me to become eventually a book illustrator. At BU, I learned about color theory and creating volumes with contour lines, better composition, and art school did train me to be a better artist. But as a painting major, my art really wasn't telling stories. So one day I realized painting wasn't enough. So I looked around the university to find more. I went to a presentation at the communications school about a new movie by Disney called The Little Mermaid. A guy presenting it was an animator, and he was really cool. When he talked about being an animator at Disney and how they used drawings to tell stories, it opened my eyes. I'd never even considered it as a career, but it made perfect sense. I was going to get into animation. Once I graduated, I knew the best place to break into animation was Los Angeles. So I bought a used station wagon and stuffed it with all my things and took 2 months to drive across the country. It was amazing. When I arrived in LA, I was excited to work in animation, but I had no animation experience, no degree in animation, no work in my portfolio that showed I knew anything about working in animation. I was not prepared at all. Because of that, I had to take temp jobs doing filing. In my spare time, I started working on adding new art to my portfolio, but this is way before the internet, so I had no way of researching what I needed to do. But one day, my housemate at the time was at a bar, bonding with a fellow motorcyclist, and this guy told my housemate that he ran an animation program in the LA schools, and they needed teachers. My housemate told him about me, that I was an artist trying to get into animation. The program the guy was talking about was called Animaction, and it ran 2-day animation workshops in all the middle schools and high schools throughout the Los Angeles school system. So thanks to my housemate, I got an interview to be an animation teacher at these workshops. On the day I interviewed, one of the teachers hadn't shown up. It was an emergency. They needed someone to replace him. So he threw me in. I knew very little about animation. I'd never taught anything before and never worked with kids before. No training, no explanation on what I was supposed to do. What could I do? I knew one thing I could do. I could draw. I ended up learning along with all the kids that day, and it turned out all right. In fact, it was great. I taught with Animaction for 2 years. In that time, I taught at over 300 schools, making over 900 2-minute animated shorts with students all over Los Angeles. I learned a lot about animation from just doing it over and over again. But here's the other great benefit of Animaction that I discovered. A few of the other teachers were Simpsons. They worked on The Simpsons, and they did Animaction between seasons. Thanks to them, they helped me get a layout test for the show, a kind of show us that you can draw Homer. With my lack of experience and light on animation portfolio, I would never have been given the opportunity to test on my own, but they helped me get one. Plus, the strong artistic skills I learned at BU allowed me to draw pretty much anything. Because of that, I got the job. I worked on The Simpsons for about 6 years, and then I developed and directed a series for Disney Television called Fillmore about the safety patrol in X Middle School. Later at Disney, I helped develop and direct the first season of Jake Long, American Dragon. And over the years, I did a lot of work on many other shows and enjoyed working as a director and as a storyboard artist. Then one day in 2006, Jim Reardon, who I'd worked with on The Simpsons, who was now working at Pixar as the head of story on WALL-E, gave me a call and asked if I wanted to move to San Francisco to work at Pixar. Yes, I did. I was really lucky that my first job at Pixar was as a story artist on Toy Story 3. Lee and Michael are incredibly talented storytellers, and I learned a lot by working with them. That's me, brainstorming with the team in the story room for Toy Story 3. After Toy Story 3, I worked on subsequent Toy Story properties and Cars properties and many more. Going forward, there's a lot of new stories and new ideas I'm working on at Pixar that I'm really excited about, and I can't wait for everyone to see.
One of the questions, which is from MR Creative Productions, how do you start to brainstorm from an image?
So brainstorming from an image, is that the question? Am I understanding it correctly?
Yes, how do you brainstorm from an image?
It's not something I would necessarily do. I mean, I would brainstorming at Pixar tends to be more about an idea, like a what if idea or a what if premise. And then you'll brainstorm images based on that idea. And then from there, you build on that. So brainstorming, especially from an image, is a building and an iterative process. So really focus on something that's I've learned doing improv, something called yes and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you want to build on and see if you can improve it rather than tearing down and saying, oh, that doesn't work or this doesn't work. So if I've got an image, for example, like you're suggesting, of like maybe the image that Andrew Stanton used for finding Nemo, the image of the egg in Marlin's hand, brainstorming from that, like, what does that mean to me as far as like the dad and where is that going to go? Is he going to always be nurturing? Is he always going to be protective? And building off of that rather than saying, oh, I don't understand that image or I don't get it. It's about being positive and trying to make it better rather than being judgmental and critical.
We're going to move on now to the super cool creating of the story spine. I love this storytelling tool called the story spine because it's magically simple and amazing what it can help you create. I first learned about it actually at Pixar from the wonderful Rebecca Stockley, who was teaching an improv class. So I think to get us started, Christian and Noah are going to actually demonstrate how it works. Christian, are you going to kind of set it up and then the two of you are going to demo?
I am. I've got a little bit of lead up into it and I want to share everybody with, so I'm going to share my screen again. To understand story structure, it's helpful to try and break down what we consider a story into its simplest forms. At the most basic level, stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is how we see the world. Everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Life works this way, and so do stories. But can a sentence be an entire story? Can a list be a story? You start to see stories in all sorts of things. Our lives themselves are stories. We're born, we live, we die. These may not be traditional stories, but they become stories because our brains connect the information in meaningful ways. Stories can be incredibly short and even seemingly random, but because our brain wants to have meaning, it can take in information and make it into a story. Sometimes even one picture can tell a story. Take a look at Norman Rockwell's The Runaway. It's just a painting, one frame, a tableau, but there's enough information in that painting for your brain to understand the story. There's a beginning. A kid decided to run away. A middle, he made his way to the diner. And the end, the clerk called the police and the friendly cop arrived to take him home. Or consider Christina by Andrew Wyatt. The painting just gives you enough information to create a story in your head and to feel the distance between the woman and the house. And then look at Picasso's Guernica. Even though it's abstract, it still has enough information for our brains to understand and want there to be a story. One of my favorite games to play with my daughter is a story dice game. We take turns rolling the dice with random images on the sides and put together stories based on those images. This game is proof to me that our brains want to take information we see and make meaning out of it. Our brains want story and want story structure. But having a beginning and a middle and an end might be too basic. I learned another way to learn structure from Rebecca Stockley, who was an improv teacher at Pixar that Elise was talking about. And she introduced it as platform, challenge, and resolution. And she taught Pixar this through an improv game called the Story Spine. So the Story Spine was created by a local San Francisco playwright named Ken Adams. And you play this game by telling a story one line at a time, alternating each line back and forth with another person using the Story Spine prompts. So you go once upon a time, then every day, but one day, because of that, because of that, because of that, until finally, ever since that day, and end with the moral of the story. So at this point, Noah and I are going to test this out. Try not to drive the story yourself. Listen to what the other person says and build on that. Just like I was saying about brainstorming, build on what they've given you. Don't feel like you have to drive the story in a certain direction. Just react. Secondly, tell the story in the third person. If I say once upon a time, I went to the store, it's going to make it hard for you telling the story with me because you're not me. So make it about another person. And finally, keep your sentences short. You don't have to spend a lot of energy or creativity in building out a huge paragraph. trust that I'm going to add some stuff too. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's give this a try. So I'm just going to make up one on the fly. Once upon a time, there was a little dog that loved to play ball with his master.
Every day, he would go to the beach with his master and he would play ball. Should I add something else? Do you
Nope,
think
that's
that would
perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
But one day, when they went to the beach, they lost the ball.
Because of that, the little dog had to run off and find it.
Because of that, the dog's master thought that his dog was missing.
Because of that, the dog came back and the master was gone.
Until finally, the dog managed to run home with the ball and managed to find his master. And the master was so pleased to see his dog was safe.
Ever since that day, they've been inseparable.
The moral of the story is, don't count your dog lost until he comes home.
Okay.
The key to this game is to try and release some control, because a lot of times people, creative people especially, want to have control. And at Pixar especially, you don't have that. It's a collaborative effort. And the more you try to demand control of a project, the more you're going to most likely fail or meet up with roadblocks or difficulties. The more you can release that control and work with in collaboration, oftentimes the better result is you're going to get. You're going to get a story that neither one of us would have been able to come up with on our own.
Question number 1 is from Puddle. How do you not overcomplicate a story?
It's very easy on your first blush, your first attempt at telling a story is to overcomplicate it. And that just happens. The key is, after you're done telling that story, to go back in and see what you can take out. And more often than not, that's usually characters or places. Oftentimes, if you've got a moral and you can look at and say, well, is this character supporting that moral? Like if we had a mailman, or if we had, other characters that weren't helping tell that moral of the story, we could take them out. So then on your second telling of the story, you can focus more on the learning part of it, the moral, the theme part of it, and not on building out all these cool ideas that you have. So I would say on your first pass, don't worry too much about trying to be lean, but try and be objective after you're done and see what you can take out, and try and be brutally honest with yourself. And if you can't, find someone else that you work with that you trust that can. If you think about the story spine, it actually is platform, challenge, and resolution. There's once upon a time and every day is the platform. Who's the story about? Where are they? And what do they do? The 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the challenge. What happens? What obstacles appear? What is the journey? The Act 2 is the journey of the character trying to overcome the obstacle that you've set up. And then the resolution is the 7, 8, and 9. How is the problem solved? And how did the character or world change? So these are important things to think about when you're telling your story. This is just a quick chart about the kind of a structure for storytelling, intensity over time. And you can break it into platform, challenge, and resolution, which is Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. And the bottom is everything's okay, and the top is everything is not okay. And that's the intensity is the audience, not necessarily characters in the story. And the hook is just something that brings the audience in. And that can be as simple as once upon a time, or you won't believe what happened to me. It's something that promises the audience that they're about to hear a really cool story. And then there's an inciting incident. It's the thing that tips the platform and unbalances the world and coaxes the characters into acting. Then there's the journey of trying to succeed. Sometimes there's a false ending, but then it gets to a point of no return where they have no choice but to go forward. The Death Star is approaching, the canoe is headed over the falls, or the clock on the bomb is at 5 seconds left, and which builds to a climax, the highest point where everything is not okay. The intensity is at its highest, not because of the action of the story, but hopefully because you've built up enough empathy with your characters that the audience is intensely invested in their fate. And finally, there's a resolution. The intensity subsides and the world and character settled into a new platform for better or worse. Ideally, this is the kind of structure that you want a story to have.
How do you write dialogue between characters?
Excellent question. You write dialogue between characters honestly, and you write it from a place where you want it to be true to their characters, not necessarily true to you. Oftentimes you'll hear beginning writers write dialogue that just sounds like themselves for all the characters. So suddenly you've got 5 or 6 characters all talking almost in the same voice. So the more you can work at developing specific characters with specific worldviews and wants and needs, the better you'll be able to think about what kind of dialogue is going to come out of their mouths. And honestly, for me, when I'm writing dialogue, I like to do improv. I like to just come up with as much as I can off the top of my head, and then go back afterwards and read what I've written and pick what I think is the best. Because I think also for a lot of new writers, the biggest issue is the editor in your head that's telling you that's not good. And my experience with improv has helped me try to quiet that editor to the point where I don't feel like everything I write has to be precious right out of the gate. Because I know I'm going to iterate. I know I'm going to work on it again. I know I'm going to look at it. I know I'm going to have other people look at it. I know it's going to get notes. I know it's going to be bad. I know it's going to get better. So the best way to write dialogue, in my opinion, is to just do it. Just write it and then worry about making it better later.
That is good advice. I think what we're going to have to do now, even though we have a million great questions, is move on to the peer-to-peer review section.
So the first thing, such a great idea for a character, like that, a character that can see colors and shapes in apparently a world where that isn't possible. And then that just goes away. And I was kind of like, well, what the promise that it's like I was talking about the hook for a story. This is a great hook, and it goes away. So I feel like if you've got interesting characters or character ideas, you've got to have them pay off in your story somehow. You've got to like work them in. Otherwise, your audience is going to wonder, like, well, what's the story really about? In fact, you should probably wonder what the story's about. So once this happens,
once upon a time, there was a girl named Dovey who was the only person in the world who could see both colors and shapes. Dovey was treated like the most special person in the world, spoiled by her father's money. She had only interacted with the servants in her home and her dad, never allowed to leave the walls of her mansion home.
Oh, darn it. So I'll just explain right now. I was trying to pause it. When you're doing the story spine, especially now, try to stick to the actual words. It's really important to say every day, because what that's establishing, it's establishing a platform. It's establishing what happens every day. And they kind of did that, but it still felt very disjointed from what came before. So one of the things to think about when you're doing your own story and the story spine is try and tie in something that was said in the previous line. So like when Noah and I did it, we were trying to build off of what had come before. If your next line has nothing to do with the previous line, then your story's not going to flow and it's not going to make sense, really. So one of the questions I had is, why is she spoiled? Why is the dad rich? Like, how is this related to her abilities? Is he exploiting her abilities somehow? Is he getting rich off of, she's the only one that can see colors and shapes, so he's trapping her in his mansion and using her to tell what things have colors and shapes and no one else can? Or is he trying to protect her from a world that doesn't understand her? I mean, there are a lot of questions there. That's one other thing is, when you're telling your story to someone, ask them what's confusing, because things that make sense to you in your head when you're telling a story may not make sense to someone else who's hearing it for the first time.
We have a question from Espinosa. How do you make up antagonists?
the way I look at antagonists is they are an obstacle. If you're doing a literal character, they should often have the opposite of what your protagonist wants. So if your protagonist wants to sing, then the antagonist wants silence, and that's usually what's going to make the story resonate, because you'll have a built-in conflict. But your story doesn't necessarily always need to have a literal antagonist. It could just be an obstacle, something that they're trying to overcome that's keeping them from what they want. That's why there's platform challenge resolution. It's not platform antagonist resolution. The challenge can be a character, or it could just be a thing. It could be internal. You always want to make their want just as valid as the want of the protagonist. So if you see an antagonist and they want to stomp on flowers, it doesn't make sense to me, and probably shouldn't make sense to most people. Like, why? What do you hate about flowers? But if you make an antagonist that has, horrible hay fever, and the flowers really like make them go into convulsions and sneezing fits, then I understand why they hate flowers and they want to destroy flowers. So making the antagonists want at least understandable is really important too.
First thing that I'd like to ask you isn't necessarily a question, but I saw it in the chat and I thought it was interesting, and I was wondering if you would comment on it. So Tam wrote, sorry, one moment. I like to play the characters myself and act out potential scenes. And I was wondering, what do you think about that? How it fits into a story spine process, whether you think it could replace the story spine process, or it's an additional aspect that could benefit someone who's writing a story spine.
First, I love that question. I love that comment. That's great. You totally want to do that, to inhabit the characters. I think that it is a component of the story spine and can be used in conjunction with it. I don't think it's a replacement, because you can come up with a great character, but if you don't have a structure for the character to work in, oftentimes the character is just an exercise. It's just a moment, a fleeting kind of like view into their world, rather than a structured story, like a beginning, middle, and end. It's just like a portrait in a way, but not enough.
Gabriel asked, considering the story spine is tried and true, how can it be surprising? And after mastering the story spine, should I try a different structure, which is similar to our main poll question, which is what other structures do you use, which I assume relates back to creating a story.
Yes, Gabriel, excellent question. To be surprised, I feel like the best way to be surprised by using the story structure is, like I did with Noah, is to tell the story with another person, because doing it by yourself is okay. It's a great way to take a story that you've got and put it into that structure, because that will then allow you to see where the problems are, where the things don't fit, or it's like you've got compression, or you've got too much in one line. That's the real tool of the story structure, the story spine for me, is that taking your story and forcing it into that helps you learn what needs to be fixed. I personally feel like if you're just starting out writing stories, that you don't want to, if you're just learning how to drive, you don't want to get in a Lamborghini. you want to like get in that little Geo Metro and learn the basics. So as much as you're excited that I want to explore other, structures and other things, the story spine is a great starting place.
What would you tell your younger self?
Oh,
just some good old advice.
Good old advice. Trust that you will eventually get it right if you just keep trying, and look at failures as learning rather than, oh, it's a failure and I'm just not going to do anymore.
So just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming. Yes.
Christian, thank you. That was such good ending advice. I think we all need that advice every day.